Hi there. Good morning. Hello. Hello there. Hi there. If you're really careful viewer, I have a new chair. Now you would never notice that, but I have a new chair. It's my new chair.
Morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I have a new chair today. Trying out my new chair. It has a back massage in the chair, so this is gonna help me as I'm sitting in my chair. But it is my new way of not having a sore back for sitting in a chair for a few hours at a time. So I mean that's pretty substantial realization that you're too old to even sit in a chair. No, I I got it as a gift for my birthday from my wife, but she does know that my back sometimes is sore. So I'm sitting in the
Happy
chair.
birthday.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was actually last week, but we got back on the day. We traveled back from England and Iceland on my birthday. So that wasn't that. I didn't get any presents that day, but I did when I did over the last week, and it was fun. But it's good to be back and not traveling right now when people are all messed up. But actually, what am I talking about? I am traveling. I'm going to see my daughter in Boston this weekend. So I'm traveling back again, but internally. And that will be very fun to be able to see her in Boston. She's hopefully coming home in a few months, moving back to America, the West Coast of America. She's moving back to California. I shouldn't say America. She's moving back to
Boston's not America.
Civilization, is that what you mean?
It's the real, yeah, it's actually
The left coast.
it's the real America, but she's coming back. But I promised her I'd visit her because I haven't seen her a lot since she's been in Boston since graduation. Well, no, I mean like nobody traveled over the last 2 years, so it's not really. I had it against her. She came out here actually, but we didn't travel much around. So I'm gonna go see her, and I'm looking forward to that. But I'll just be gone Thursday through Sunday, and yeah, that is another little mini trip. But I hope everyone's doing good and staying sane, staying healthy. We've had some crazy last few days. We have Jeff Stein isn't going to join us today because they're moving, they're packing, it's a moving day for him, so he's not going to be able to be here today, coming home. And then the Schwartzes, Mike and Mary, are in Arizona visiting. They're on a drive around they're doing their summer vacation. So we have a few people that are traveling today, and again, some things to look forward to. We're working on, not that we have a lot of planning to do, but we have our Havdalah at the beach on the 21st. So that's pretty soon. I mean, it's hard to believe it's August, and we're going to be doing our Havdalah as we always do at Marina Park. That's a lot of fun going out there for the day. And we've got not this weekend, but next weekend, we're supposed to have services again with the Luperts in our building. So I'm hoping that things will be a little bit better by then, as far as people getting I don't know what to say. I mean, we have, for the most part, our community is pretty healthy and pretty vaccinated and pretty safe, but I guess I hope people aren't worried about it as much as we have been over these last couple of weeks. So I don't know what to say other than August 13th, we have services at Temple Beth and me, and I'm hoping that hoping that it will be as normal as services are at Temple Beth and Me as they ever are. So I'm looking forward to having that. We actually had a bat mitzvah last weekend. On Saturday we had a bat mitzvah at our temple, and it went really smoothly. It was nice. The air conditioning worked, and it was super hot that day, so that was really nice. I don't know why I say that, other than it wasn't working a few days before, so I should say that was really good. And so it was all good. And then, like, something melted in the air conditioner. It's so hot outside that some switch melted. Anyways, and then we also had a baby naming on Saturday for young Jonah, for Floyd's grandson, who we named. So from what I found out too on this weekend, on this wonderful baby naming, that he's 1 year old, but he's been coming to Midrash for most of the last year. So he actually is listening to Judith and Rosemary reading the legends of the Jews, and it's a great way to begin life. I can only tell you it was a lot of fun as a kid reading Midrash, and I hope actually I think in most ways it was at least as much fun as reading the Torah, and at least as memorable as reading the Torah was reading Midrash. So I think that's awesome to have kids be steeped in Midrash. Some of it's scary actually, but I guess so are movies. Even Disney movies are sometimes scary, right? I mean, even the old Disney movies, like, Bambi was pretty scary. I remember as a kid, that was kind of frightening, but and kind of sad. But yeah, the Midrash can be scary and freaky too, a little spooky. Not so much today. Today's Midrash. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. I won't say that, because there's always every week there's something you're like, where did that come from? And oftentimes it is a little scary and frightening, which of course in any good story, you need to have a good villain, you need to have good tension, and you have to have a little bit of fear. Otherwise, it's not that fun. But you have to have a little bit of drama. And so we do have, even in this week, when we're talking about census counting from the book of Numbers, which is really one of the driest chapters in the whole Torah. I mean, he ranks up there with talking about skin diseases in Sarah, in Metzora and Tazria, that we have portions that just list numbers of tribes. So there is Midrash on that, which we read last week. We read about the counting of the tribes and how each tribe is represented by a different person. And what we read last week, the prince of each tribe actually, there's Midrash drawn from those names, and that's what we read last time. Is each tribe, Naphtali, Gad, each of those tribes have a person, and that person is also identified by their father. So sometimes the wordplay is on the father and on the prince, if you will. And now, after that in Numbers, after the first couple of chapters, which are the lists of the tribes, the 12 tribes, then we go into a specific census of the Levites. The Levites are counted separately, and each of the groups of the Levites are counted. There's 3 clans, or 3 sons of Levi, who are counted. And for those who were with us in the Wednesday night class, we read this a couple months ago. These are, fairly dry lists of the Levites, but it also, of course, tells us how important the Levites were, in that they're counted separately, and that their roles are also assigned. So as the Mishkan, as the tabernacle made its way through the wilderness for 40 years, each of those 3 groups had a different role. So one group's role was to essentially set up the wood pieces for the tent. The next group put the curtains up once the once the frame was up. And then the last group actually carried the things like the ark and the menorah and the treasures, if you will, that are there. And so you can imagine that group was pretty special because they're the ones who got to come into contact with the really holy objects. But it is interesting that each of those tribes within the tribe of Levi have an accounting, have an audit, and we understand why each of them is important. And within the tabernacle space, within the camp, they're spread around so that you have the three subgroups of the Levites, the Kohathites, the Merarites, and the Gershonites. They're all three of them around the inner tabernacle. So you have the tribes laid out, 4 groups of 3, and then inside that you have 3 groups, and then you have the Kohanim and Moses as kind of the 4th group of those inner groups. So you have 4 on the outside and 4 kind of in the inside, and then the Mishkan, the tabernacle, in the center. So that's what we're reading, the Midrash on that, which we will get started, even though, again, we're got some people traveling. We are very glad that you're here. And I just made a mistake. I do not want to put this on YouTube. We do always, by the way, in case you miss a class, they are all up to date. They're all on YouTube. And believe it or not, we have people that are watching them after they've already happened. We always have some views on YouTube, and we don't really publicize it that much, but yes, it is. If you miss a class, we're not always up to date, but we are up to date now. Last week we were all up to date with our classes. You can also watch them on Facebook because Facebook saves them as well. But we are going to we are up on Facebook. And Rosemary, if you would not mind, there we are. If you would start our reading for the census of the Levites.
Moses at the census did not take into consideration the tribe of Levi, because God had not commanded him to select a prince for this tribe as for all the others. Hence, he drew the conclusion that they were not to be counted. Naturally, he was not sure of his decision in this matter and wavered whether or not to include the Levites in the number when God said to him, "Do not muster the tribe of Levi nor number them among the children of Israel." At these words, Moses was frightened, for he feared that his tribe was considered unworthy of being counted with the rest and was therefore excluded by God. But God quieted him, saying, "Do not number the Levites among the children of Israel, number them separately." There were several reasons for numbering the Levites separately. God foresaw that owing to the sin of the spies who were sent to search the land, all men who were able to go to war would perish in the wilderness, all that were numbered of them according to their whole number from 20 years old and upward. Now, had the Levites been included in the sum total of Israel, the angel of death would have held sway over them also. Wherefore God excluded them from the census of all the tribes, that they might in the future be exempt from the punishment visited upon the others and might enter the promised land. The Levites were furthermore the bodyguard of God, to whose care the sanctuary was entrusted, another reason for counting them separately. God in this instance conducted himself like the king, who ordered one of his officers to number his legions, but added, "Number all the legions, excepting only the legion that is about me."
Well, there's a lot there. Let's maybe actually do the last part first, which is, we have to explain that Moses is worried. He's a Levite, and so he's worried that God originally doesn't count the Levites amongst the rest of the tribes. So he sees that as a bad thing. And of course, it's not a bad thing. It's actually a very good thing. And that the Levites are going to be given special responsibilities They get to take care of the tabernacle, as we said. The Mishkan is their responsibility, and they're like an elite corps of soldiers, which is what, the rabbis, knew enough about the Romans to know that legions of soldiers were oftentimes, they were soldiers, but sometimes they were more than soldiers, in the sense that sometimes legions were political pawns and used by emperors or would-be emperors, would-be Caesars, as their own personal bodyguard. And so this would oftentimes be like one of the things that made the Romans especially susceptible to civil war, is that if a commander of a legion, decided, hey, you know what, I want to be Caesar now, he just kind of took his own legion, and that was his own private army. So that happened, and sometimes legions fought each other because they were under the leadership of one general or one Caesar. So that kind of shows you the rabbis kind of knew what was going on. They paid attention to the politics around them, and knew that sometimes these were not just warriors; they were also kind of political pawns. There were times when obviously, we sometimes forget this because it doesn't really matter, but there are armies that kind of create, or countries that create sub armies that are kind of at the personal command of that essentially what the SS was originally for the Nazis was the special unit of soldiers that were kind of outside of the Wehrmacht, outside of the rest of the German army, and that was a political decision that Hitler made. There are other people who've done that before. Essentially, by the way, there are presidents who have treated the Marines as essentially their own private military that they use before they, declare an act of war. That there was always that kind of actually, I remember a Marine recruiter coming out of my high school, talking to the students trying to get us to enlist in the Marines. And he said, "You're like the president's own private army." And I said, that's not a good thing. That's not, you're not going to sell me with that. But there were, there was, that idea. Well, those were the mid 80s when Reagan was in power. And I think there was more of a feeling of that maybe back then. I think there's a little less today, that the Marines are the president's own little private army that he controls. But the Marines used to do, I think, even up, definitely up to the 80s, were, doing stuff that other, units of the military did not do. But anyways, the Jews seem to know that. They seem to know that the Romans operated like that with their units. So I always found that interesting when they drop a little bit of Roman history into the Midrash, and kind of recognize that armies that are controlled by a king are political units. And King David did the same thing. There were examples of that in Jewish history, in Israelite history. So this isn't something that they're also not familiar with from our own history, our own Jewish history. Solomon and David both had their own units of guards that were their own kind of private inner army that, was a professional army that was not a militia that was raised by, calling up all the farmers and saying, hey, you're going to be on my own private army. So the Levites are kind of treated as a unit of God's army, in that they're not like everybody else. That's why they're called the bodyguard of God. bodyguard is maybe not the greatest translation, but you get the idea, which is that they're God's warriors, which, you
God's
know,
Marines.
there were crusaders who felt that too. I mean, essentially the Hospitallers, you know, a lot of the crusaders were just average farmers and people that just got, you know, called up and felt the power to go out. But then there were soldiers who said, no, this is going to be our life. You know, we're warriors for God. And the Knights Templar and some of these guys became soldier monks, if you will, and that was their deal. So this Midrash is pre that, though. It's pre Crusader stuff, but it shows you that.
So we got Levi Jedi here is what we got.
Yes, these are Jedis. These are, yeah, why not? Yeah, I like that. They look probably more like Jedis. They are, we see the Levites functioning that way during the golden calf incident. We see them essentially kind of being the ones who are most that are most loyal and the least likely to do that. And I mean, in a way, the Midrash, not even the Midrash, that legend or that mythology of Levites goes back to Levi himself, right? To the original guy, Levi, who's the brother of Dinah, who goes in and kills with Shimon, goes in and kills all the Shechemites because he's upset that they've treated his sister like a whore. And yeah, I mean, Levi seems to be that guy. And again, Pinchas is a descendant of Levi. Pinchas is he's the son of Eleazar, but he's the grandson of Aaron. He's the one who goes and stabs the Israelite and the Midianite woman who are engaging in sexual, an orgy for Baal Peor, for the god of the Midianites and Moabites. He's acting like Levi. So this idea that the Levites are God's warriors is contained in the Torah. It's definitely in the Midrash, and you could say, it kind of carries to the priests, to the Kohanim later on with the Maccabees. So this idea that there are soldiers of God, it exists. It exists within Judaism. I will tell you, one of the interesting features of the modern day Israeli army is there was, for a long time, I would say for the good 60 years of Israel's existence, a kind of, it wasn't a spoken truth or a spoken, it was kind of the accepted norm in Israel that soldiers and the military leadership was secular, meaning that the generals and the leadership of the Israeli army were, for the most part, even if they were politically conservative, they were not religious. And I think Israelis felt comfortable with that because they knew that when you mix religion and the military together, you can get some crazy people. And I think they recognized that. They wanted to have people who were not religious zealots and not extremists and not fundamentalists controlling the military, because they didn't want some general to wake up one day and say, I had a vision that today's the day that God has, put Iran in our fingertip, within our grasp, right? They didn't want that. And so there was, for a long time, a real separation between the religious movement and the army. The cost to that was, of course, that the religious also didn't serve in the military for the most part, and that caused some resentment because average Israeli said, well, your kids aren't in the military. They're sitting and studying in yeshiva while our kids are serving in the military and getting killed. But there was this kind of unspoken also recognition is you don't want those kids in the military because you don't want to have a bunch of, you don't have a want, do you really want evangelical Jews, fundamentalist Jews, Jews who feel that God is, that they're fighting for God? Do you want those people on the front lines? Now, you can make the argument that those are passionate soldiers, but they're also people who won't question authority, who won't maybe think maybe there's humanity on the other side too. And so people were like, that was a pact that they kind of made that made everything comfortable within Israel. That's broken down a little bit in the last generation because there are Orthodox units now in the military, and it was a line that has been blurred in the last generation. Now, I will tell you, for the most part, that there have not been negative repercussions because of it, in the sense that there are, it's not like there's units of Orthodox Jews that are now preparing to wipe out, their Arab enemies on behalf of God. That's not happening. If anything, the religious soldiers are kind of they're kind of understanding the way life is like for most secular Israelis. So for the most part, any of the kind of cultural effects have become more open than closed and going the other direction, I would say, in my mind. But there is a fear that could change, but it hasn't yet. And it is a little dance with, I won't say a dance with the devil, but it makes it a little bit harder if you bring that together, if you bring the religious and the secular leadership. If you blur that line, there can be, you could get stuff that was potentially scary. I will say that. Anyways, it is an interesting fact that Israel, for the most part, has avoided that type of mentality of being God's army. The Israeli soldiers definitely see themselves as national, as belonging to the nation, but not that they're doing God's work. So I will point that out. That has not happened for the most part yet in Israel, and it's not like it's happening. All right. I do want to point out one other kind of spooky thing, which is that as long as the Levites were not included in the counting of all Israelites, they were not susceptible to the angel of death. Why? Because the angel of death was going to take out 1/40 of the Israelites every year on the anniversary of the spy incident. We've talked about that in Midrash before, and I will tell you that in traditional Judaism, in Orthodox tradition, the angel of death literally on that night of, again, the anniversary of the spies was Tisha B'Av. It's the first bad thing that happened on Tisha B'Av, that every Tisha B'Av, every Israelite man between the ages of 20 and 60 would lie down on Tisha B'Av, and 2.5% of them didn't get up every year. Yeah. You heard me. Every year, a few thousand people died that night. Not like at some point during the journey, but on that day in particular, that night, the angel of death took them, and that was and still is considered to be like the first horrible thing that happens on Tisha B'Av, and what the belief about what happens when these people die over 40 years, that it's not, oh, they just drop in the wilderness, but they actually drop on a certain day, which makes that really scary, very scary. And it's a pretty well-established midrash. I mean, it's not like people believe that, no, that's in the Torah. It's not. It's in the midrash, but it's pretty well known and pretty well accepted. That is, like, people who tell the story of Tisha B'Av will tell you that that's what happened. Not that it's a midrash, but that's what happened on Tisha B'Av. That every year for 40 years, people died. All right. So again, Levites were not part of that. They did not die on Tisha B'Av. All right. What else do we know about the Levites?
The extent of God's love for Levi is evident through the command given to Moses to number in the tribe of Levi all males from a month old and upward, whereas in the other tribes, none were numbered save men able to go to war from 20 years and upward. Upon other occasions, God even had the embryos among the Levites numbered. This occurred upon Jacob's entrance into Egypt, when the number 70 for his family was attained only by including Yocheved, who was still in the womb, and similarly at a future time upon the return of the exiles from Babylon. For at that time, only 23 of the priestly sections returned. Hence, to complete their number, they had to include Levi, who belonged to the missing section, even though he was still in the womb. When Moses was ordered to number among the Levites all children from a month old and upward, he said to God, "You bid me count them from a month old and upward. Shall I now wander about their courts and houses and count each child, seeing that you gave me such a command?" But God replied, "Do what you can do, and I will do what I can do." It now came to pass that whenever Moses betook himself to a Levite tent, he found the Shekinah awaiting him, telling him exactly the number of children without his having to count them. Was what, beneath him to count children?
That was a very strange midrash. As I said, there are strange things here, even in the weird, like you'd think, well, counting, I mean, that's just pretty dry. No, the Levites, why do we know this? Well, because it does say you count them from 30 days. You count the Levite kids from a month. That's not what we do with the other tribes. The other tribes, we counted them from 20 to 60. So here you're counting babies. And the Midrash goes even further. No. With the Levites, we even counted their embryos. What? The embryos? Are you kidding me? And what do? They derive this from the fact that when you count the amount of people who went down to Egypt with Jacob, it doesn't really come out to 70. It comes out to 69, which, okay, they rounded up to 70. And then there's this other idea, well, they counted Joseph in that 70. He's already there, but we counted him again. We counted him as one of the 70. There's different ways of getting to that 70. I mean, you could just say, well, they had 69 and that's kind of 70. But no, we include Yocheved, who is, of course, according to the tradition, a child of Levi. It says Bat Levi, that she's a daughter of Levi, which of course means that Amram, Moses' father, is actually her nephew. She's just born in the same generation as Amram's father, but she was born very late. And so she is included in the 70 that go down. And so there's a basis for that. It's a little weird. But Yocheved, of course, is such an important person that I guess you could say that kind of makes sense. But no, then they apply it to everybody. They apply it to any Levite during the time of Moses who's going to be counted. And even more so, it says that the Levites are always counted from embryonis, or whatever that word would be, from embryonic stage. From the embryonic stage, they're counted.
Is that how they got to 600,000?
This is crazy. This is craziness. This is
Who's
literally
600,000?
I understand, but that's 600,000 men, which is even crazier. But that's 600,000. Yeah, I mean, what do you want me to tell you? I mean, we've not found archaeological evidence that 600,000 men came up from Egypt. I mean, the theory is that they used the numbers of roughly how many people they had, or maybe a fraction of how many people they had during the time of King David, when they actually wrote the text. People either felt they didn't have a great idea of figuring out exponential numbers of how many there would have been, 500 years, 400, 300 years before, 200 years before, whatever. But however, whenever they wrote it, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Yes, it is possible that during the time of King David, there were 600,000 men in the land of Israel. It might be high, but the land could have, based on the archaeology, yes, it's within realm. It's in the realm of possibility that there were that many men then. But if the Israelite, if the people who wrote it didn't consider population explosion properly, which they could have. I mean, it's not like they didn't understand that people multiply. They do during Egypt times, even though they say that's kind of like extensive or miraculous explosion of people. I don't know what to tell you. This is a midrash that there are times when, like, and again, it's God-given powers. It's not like everyone can do this all the time. But if God wants you to, you can actually count embryos if you have God helping, because it says Moses betook himself to a Levite tent. He found the Shekhinah awaiting him, telling him, how many children were there, and he didn't have to count them. So yeah, if you have the Shekhinah telling you, then you don't have to count. But yeah, it's bizarre that they would even go to that realm. Now, it's partly because they said you can count from a month old, which the rabbis recognize that seems way young, but that's what the Torah said. I mean, the Torah does say you count them from a month upwards. Now you count them, they don't start their service, remember, until they're 30. So they don't even start their service at 20. Actually, one place says 25 and one place in the Torah says 30. So there's actually a difference. And there's actually a midrash and I wouldn't say it's a very extensive midrash, but there's an explanation for why there are two different numbers given in there, which is that for the first 5 years, you're kind of in a training apprenticeship before you start at 30. But you count them in the census from a month old. So it's really interesting that, like, the Levites are treated so special that you actually count their I almost said fetuses, you count their embryos. You count an embryo. That's amazing. And it's very weird. And they knew it was weird. I mean, they said you need to have divine help in order to get that. And when they go through this big vi, this recognition of this, it's really interesting because the rabbis, they can draw from any part of the Torah. I mean, they can draw from, they can go forward, they can go forward, backward in time. Here, they're actually saying that this guy Bigvi, who's mentioned in the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, that he's listed as he's listed there and there as one of the people who returned from the Babylonian exile when the Persians allowed us to come back home. So that happens 5th century. But he wasn't really there yet. I don't know how to tell you this other than we know this guy Bigvi. He's actually mentioned in the Elephantine papyri that we found in Egypt that were written in the late 5th century, early 400 BCEs, that there was this guy, and there's a question of when he was born or how he would be counted. Now, again, it could be that somebody added him to the list who came back, but they're saying, we know he didn't come back. He was too young. He would have been too young to come back with the exiles, but he was listed there. And so they said, well, because, with Levites, we can list them before they're born. So he's listed there in the list of Ezra and Nehemiah, of the list of Levites who come back, but he's not. He wasn't. It was either an anachronistic mistake in the text, or you have to have a midrash like this, which is that they counted him even though he was not born yet. Anyways, it's probably a mistake, and not a mistake, but was written after the fact, after he was already born. It's not a big deal, but there's a precedence for it elsewhere in Jewish history, but much after Moses. So that story of the exiles returning happens literally 800 years after Moses, or 750 years after Moses. So the rabbis can do that. They can draw on Jewish history from closer to when they lived. Still, by the way, a long time. They live a long time after this guy. By the way, Bigvi, that's such a clearly Persian name. I mean, it just shows you, and I don't want to dwell on this too much because it's very tangential, but it shows you that when the Jews returned home when they were in the Babylonian exile and then under Babylonians and then Persian authority, they came back with Persian names or Babylonian names. I mean, one of the best examples is Mordecai. We talk about, and Esther. I mean, Esther's is, I mean, we know what Esther's real name is, though. Her name is Hadassah, and she has a Hebrew name. But Mordecai doesn't have the other name. He doesn't have the Hebrew name. He has Marduk, who is the main Babylonian god, in his name, and it's the Persian version of Marduk. It's the Mordecai, like Bigvi. This is a clearly Persian god name, and the Jews had these names when they came back that were, in some cases, very Persian. Not everybody. Ezra has a completely legitimate Hebrew Aramaic name, but not Bigvi, or again, that's like Bigtan and Teresh and all the names that we have in the book of Esther. So the interesting thing is Jews took on Persian names, Babylonian names, while they were in exile. And it shouldn't surprise us that Jews have taken on names, the cultures, the places that they've lived. And what was interesting is sometimes a guy named like Bigvi would have a son and he would name him Moshe or Aharon, or, he would name him after another Levite who had a Hebrew name. So sometimes you had a Persian name dad and a Hebrew named kid, which still happens today, except it's English and Hebrew. So you could have, or I'd say English or Latin and Greek. So you could have a person whose name was, for example, Mark, who has a daughter who he names Dina or Shira, which are clearly not Latin or English names. They gave them Hebrew names. I gave up my slave name and gave my children their names of freedom, their Hebrew names. No, I mean, look, that was a conscious decision on my part to give my kids names that were Hebrew names. It was not an accident. It was a conscious decision on our part, my wife and our part, to not give our kids non-Hebrew based names. So, anyways. And occasionally there are rabbis, friends of mine, who've taken on their Hebrew names and given up their English names because they wanted to be referred to by their names in Hebrew. I did not want to be known as Moshe. But I have friends or mentors who are called Moshe, who were originally Morris, or whatever. Actually, I can think of one who was Morris, who changed his name to Moshe. So changed his name back to his Hebrew name. Anyways, so we will continue with what we know about the Levites, the Levim.
In the choice of this tribe, God showed his preference for the seventh. For Levi was the seventh pious man, starting from Adam, to wit, Adam, Noah, Enoch, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Levi. As in this instance, so in many others did God indicate his love for the seventh. He sits enthroned in the seventh heaven. Of the seven worlds, the seventh alone is inhabited by human beings. Of the early generations, the seventh was the most excellent, for it produces Enoch. Moses, seventh among the patriarchs, was judged worthy of receiving the Torah. David, seventh son of Jesse, was chosen as king. In periods of time also, the seventh was the favorite. The seventh day is the Sabbath. The seventh month, Tishri, is the month of the holy days. The seventh year is the sabbatical year of rest, and every seventh sabbatical year of rest is the year of Jubilee.
Yeah, so 7 is a great number, folks, in case you didn't know. Of course you knew. Everybody knows that 7 is a good number in Judaism. And based on Jacob being the 6th generation, Levi would have been the 7th generation, or at least not, I shouldn't say the 7th generation, but in his generation, he was the pious one in his generation. Meaning of the 12 sons of Jacob, he was the one who was pious. And of course, they add Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the 3 patriarchs, and then the 3 people that the rabbis consider to be honorable patriarchs pre-Abraham, which are Adam, Noah, and Enoch. Those are the only people that we know about in the pre-Abrahamic times who are virtuous or pious. We've read that before. This isn't the first time that we've seen that you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then if you want to add the previously important people, then you have that. You have those. Of course, what's interesting about Enoch, who we've read about in the Midrash, in Genesis, Enoch was the 7th generation from Adam. So he was the 7th generation. And so he's 7th within that. So you have all these 7s, you have all these, you have all these 7s in the Bible. And of course, we find it weird that Tishrei, the month of Rosh Hashanah, which we're only a month away from, folks, we are just about to start the month of Elul, the last month on the Jewish calendar. So that's upon us, folks. Literally, I hate to tell people because, again, I don't want to think about it. It's busy times, but Elul, actually, Rosh Chodesh Elul is on Monday night. Saturday night. There's 2 Rosh Chodesh days of Elul. The 30th of Av is Saturday night, and then the 1st of Elul is Sunday night. So, and is the home stretch of our year. But again, based on the biblical calendar, it's not the 1st month, it's the 7th month. So when they're turning to that, they're using still the biblical calendar, which is beginning in, according to the Torah, the 1st month is the month of springtime, the month of Nisan, so the month of Passover. there's another important thing to think about. That in a month, or a month and 4 days, when Rosh Hashanah hits, because we really do begin the year now at Rosh Hashanah, that's when our next sabbatical year of rest starts, folks. We're about to enter a Shemitah year, a sabbatical year in Israel, where we're not supposed to harvest. Very, 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 very interesting predicament for Israel right now, because the Shemitah year is going to come right towards the end of, let's hope, a very strange time in world history, which is we spent the last year and a half under COVID restrictions. So how is the Shemitah going to be enforced, kept, celebrated, whatever you want to say, in the midst of COVID? And there are people working overtime right now, figuring out how they're going to implement Shemitah in Israel this year, coming out of COVID. They will. I mean, they're not going to not do it, but there are going to have to be some strange adaptations made in order to keep a Shemitah year, which again begins in about a month. Shemitah only applies to Israel, the land of Israel. You don't have to keep Shemitah in America, though we do believe in the importance of crop rotation and giving your land a chance to break every so often. But yeah, in Israel, it's a pretty important law. And it's one that is enforced. It is kept by Jewish farmers that are religious Jewish farmers. Not every farmer is a religious farmer in Israel. So there are farms that don't follow the Shemitah, but they cannot sell their crops in religious stores that are religious. So it's a challenge. It is a biblical law that Jews now deal with again, which is, again, 7 years. So Shemitah is upon us in a month, a little over a month. I'm sure I've been to Israel during Shemitah years. You don't really notice it, especially if you're not a farmer. You don't notice it. There's still food in Israel. It's not like all the food goes, there's no food to be had, but it does make a big difference to farmers and to the way people figure out how they're going to generate food. It's a biblical law that food manufacturers have to take into consideration in Israel, whether you are a small farm or a farm or a factory that's producing like Osem or some of the other companies that produce food on an international level. You actually have to take into consideration the Shemitah year when you're planning out your production and your
Does it affect the level of kashrut?
What do you mean?
Well, like restaurants in Israel that are still considered kosher,
Mm-hmm.
if they use food grown by a farm, can they use food grown by a farm that doesn't follow?
No. So people know. I mean, they have a seal if they do that. I mean, the interesting thing is that the production facilities for all the companies that, if they're going to produce in Israel, they're going to have to follow this, which means that like the large companies in Israel, the large food production companies, they have to deal with this, which means that everybody has to deal with it. Now, I'll give you an example. Like if you go to Ralph's or Walmart, whatever, you'll find Osem products. You'll find products made in Israel by Osem. Osem's owned by Nestle. I mean, most people don't know that, or they don't care. They've never heard of Osem. But if you've heard of Osem, it's owned by Nestle, which means that Nestle has to deal with. They have to deal with the kosher supervision and the Shemitah year, they have to deal with it. So that means that this year, for example, OSEM probably produced much. I've never actually gone into depth with this, but they had to produce a higher level of production this year because of what's going to happen next year. So when they make noodles or, OSEM, trying to think of all the products, we use them we use their soup mix and stuff like that, but all of their stuff that they do, they have to take into consideration just the Shemitah year when they're producing stuff. So that's a company that's a multinational company. It's actually obviously owned by a multinational company, and they actually have to take into consideration Shemitah. So it's pretty, it's pretty cool. I've never like talked to somebody in the company about it, but it is something I would definitely ask them about. What it's like if you're working for a multinational and you have to explain to them, well, we're in Shemitah. It's like people look at you like, are you kidding me? Or are you? And it really is amazing. I mean, it is amazing that these biblical laws are still being worked into people's lives. And, for the last 70 something years of Israel's existence, which is, 10 or 11, I guess 11, this would be the 11th Shemitah year. The Israel as a country has had to figure out how to implement this while still trying to be a modern country.
Well, let me ask, I think you just said they could, it only applies to the land of Israel. So if you're like a restaurant or something, you could import food, right?
Absolutely. And then there's a question of whether lands that are Palestinian controlled,
I was going to ask about that.
You can grow. And that's what they have done in the past, is that they have allowed products to essentially be imported from 2 miles away, when they were grown in farms in Gaza or in West Bank. So I don't know. It's a weird law. And again, I will tell you that in my estimation, one of the reasons why food production in Israel, why Israel has shifted away from food production, is because it is really hard to deal with these kinds of issues. And, quite frankly, there's not a whole lot of, you can only even with advanced modern food production techniques, which Israel does have, there's only so much that you can do in order to you can only monetize food to a certain level. I think Israel's always wanted to have some type of independence when it came to food production, but on the other hand, it's not considered to be there's limited growth opportunities in food production. There's only so many people who can get rich in food production. The people who own the company are essentially the only people who are going to ever get rich. So because of that, even kibbutzim have moved away from food production, because again, it's unless you're doing something like organic high-end, duck, which some of them do. I mean, there are kibbutzim that unfortunately are, doing foie gras, and not what I'd like to have them do, but they have a right, I guess, to do it. Unless you're doing that, there's not a whole lot of money in food production. So Israel's definitely does not produce food the way it used to. And I get it. I mean, who wants to deal with sabbatical years, kashrut production that's in some ways is even more corrupt than it is outside the land of Israel, because the level of oversight in Israel is essentially like the kosher overseers there. They observe you like the FDA, does in America. So I get it. I mean, I think it must be a nightmare for farmers unless they opt out of the system completely. And decide they want to do, some kind of boutique cheese or something like that, and not be worried about it. So that's why you have kibbutzim like Ahava and other kibbutzim that are doing high tech, because it makes more sense to have people work in those fields where they're not going to get driven crazy by trying to comply with this law. It's hard. I mean, I can only imagine how hard it is.
I mean,
So,
even in the 70s, when I had relatives at Kibbutz Afek, they were still farming and raising dairy cattle, but all their money came from making valves for milking machines.
yep. And that is a great example of, what kibbutzim did, which was they encouraged, ingenuity and some of the great, irrigation techniques, and some of the great, farming, I would say agriculture related, kind of innovations came from Israel, because they encouraged it. They actually had to come up with some really clever things. But yeah, when it came to even dairy production, there were some things that Israel did. Obviously, I mean, people know that like certain kinds of tomatoes and things like that, the Israelis, pioneered, and everyone's using them now because Israel figured out how to do that. But yeah, I mean, Israel ended up doing that. And by the way, I mean, that's the same kind of stuff that's been used in high tech and almost applied everywhere across the board. It actually that gets back to what we were talking about before, which was the military. One of the reasons why Israel has really not wanted to have fundamentalist soldiers is because Israel really, even in its military, this, people have talked about this, they encourage soldiers to challenge authority if they think that if they think a superior officer is making a mistake, they are allowed to challenge their authority. And the fear, I think, is if you create a hierarchical system where people are feeling that they're challenging God, if they're challenging their general, it's going to do away with one of the things that's really made the Israeli army successful, which is people saying, hey, wait a second, you're totally missing this, and you're putting us in jeopardy. And again, we've talked about this before too. One of the lessons of the Yom Kippur War was that people down the ranks were not listened to, who said, no, the Syrians are going to attack. The Egyptians are we have the intelligence, we have this information, you're not listening to it. And again, for those who saw Valley of Tears, the miniseries, that was a major theme in it, was that people were like, Israel learned the lesson that you do not say, oh, well, we're not going to listen to a junior officer. If a junior officer has good information, we're going to listen to them. And it became even more part of what made the Israeli army different. And I think it goes across the board for their corporations, is they really do expect junior employees to come up with great ideas and say, you're doing it the wrong way. And that is an encouraged mode of business in Israel. Is you'll see people are shocked by it, because it goes against, especially what's, I wouldn't say America is a little closer to that, but you're in Europe, and you never challenge your boss in Europe. I mean, that's just like, it's literally a death sentence. You'll be fired. But in Israel, they encourage employees to challenge and to come up with new ideas. Innovation in Israel is kind of fostered by this idea that anybody can come up with a good idea. And I mean, I don't like to make judgments, but I think they're right. I think Israel has taken that Jewish quality of curiosity and literally not being afraid to buck the trends and saying, you know what, this is a Jewish strength. Let's make it part of our national ethos. So definitely is hard to keep people under control that way. It's not easy. It's not easy when everybody thinks they know better than the prime minister, but and their bosses, but it's helped Israel survive. So exact opposite of their enemies, where you've had people who had no business being in authority, leading militaries because they had the right connections or whatever. And for the most part, Israel's been able to win every war because the militaries that they've been going against are so clearly inefficient and inept and organized on nepotism that they, it just showed how these operational systems, when they meet each other, there's one that's really broken. So again, it is what it is. It's definitely something that I'm proud of, that Israel has made part of its national operations. So back to the Levites.
Another reason for numbering even the youngest boys among the Levites was that the tribe of Levi as a whole had the responsibility of atoning for the sin of the firstborn among the children of Israel. For it was these who, until the time of the worship of the golden calf, performed the services of the priesthood, and their privilege was taken from them owing to this, their sin. This prerogative was then conferred upon the tribe of Levi, who, moreover, dedicating themselves man for man to the service of the Lord, served as an atonement for the firstborn of Israel, that they might not be destroyed as they deserved.
So there's a weird midrash, which I think we've read before. We've definitely discussed it before, which is that after the golden calf, every firstborn of the Israelites should have been killed as a punishment, like the punishment for the Egyptians. So that's a really very hard punishment. But instead, the Levites took the place of the Israelite, the average Israelite, and are dedicated. Well, this all comes about because earlier in the book of Exodus, we read that every Jewish or every Israelite child at 30 days is essentially dedicated to God. But that dedication after the golden calf incident flipped to, no, we're going to kill, they're dead. These kids are from horrible people and they're going to be punished. Well, instead, the Levites essentially take their place at 30 days and basically become the servants of God at 30 days. And because they're so wonderful, they get to stop the Israelite kids at birth, the firstborn kids, from being killed. That is a really wild idea, but it's based on, again, the fact that we were supposed to be punished at the golden calf incident, and this other interesting ritual we call Pinyon Haben, where the firstborn child of a mother is supposed to be dedicated to God. So what is that really about? This next paragraph.
The exchange of Levites in place of the firstborn did, however, present a difficulty, for God had communicated the number of Levites to Moses in the following way: their number amounts to as many as the number of my legion. For when God came down upon Sinai, 22,000 angels surrounded him, and just as many men did the Levites number. Outside of these, there were 300 firstborn among the Levites that could not well be offered in exchange for the firstborn among the other tribes, because their standing was the same as theirs. As the number of firstborn among the other tribes exceeded the number of Levites by 273, this surplus remained without actual atonement. Hence, God ordered Moses to take from them 5 shekels apiece by the poll as redemption money and give it to the priests. This sum was fixed upon by God, who said, "You sold the firstborn of Rachel for 5 shekels, and for this reason shall you give as redemption money for every firstborn among you, 5 shekels."
And this is the ritual of Pinyon Haben, technically to this day. The firstborn son is supposed to be redeemed from the Levites by the parents, only if that is a firstborn, being a boy. only if the mother never had a miscarriage or an abortion before. And I don't know how often it's uh, done today, based on the fact that, technically speaking, not technically speaking, one of the other things that wasn't very common in the biblical period, but is especially common today, is how are many, many babies born today, folks? Anybody? Cesarean.
Uh,
Cesarean babies,
don't count as firstborns.
they're not Pidyon Ben. They're not redeemed. So the tradition is that you go to a Kohen, you go to a priest, and you redeem your son from him for 5 silver coins, for 5 shekels. And so this again is based on Exodus, the law from Exodus. It's based on this other tradition that the sons of Israel would have been killed at the golden calf incident, which is interesting because it is kind of connected to leaving Egypt and the fact that they should not have been worshiping a calf, which is like the Egyptian gods. And so these are connected to this idea of redeeming the firstborn, which they also connect back to Joseph, who is sold by his brothers. So when it refers to the firstborn of Rachel, they're talking about Joseph's redemption. I was redeemed. I have pictures of my Pidyon Haben when I was 30 days old. There are pictures of people holding me at my Pidyon Haben. I think I have my kippah, my little baby kippah from my Pidyon Haben. My mom saved. My mom saved everything, so I have those things. And again, Levite kids don't have to be. They don't have to be redeemed. So if you're a Kohen or a Levi, you're not redeemed. You don't have to be.
If the mother is.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
Because my mom was Kohen and my older brother did not have a Pidyon Haben, but his son did.
Yes. Now there's an interesting question, which was really not a question. There is a question whether well, I wouldn't say it's a question. It never was really an issue until recently. What would happen if your husband, if you're a Levite woman, but not married to a Jew? Or a Kohen, if you're a Levite or Kohen, your dad isn't Jewish, but as Judith said, your mom is Kohen or Levite. Do you redeem that child? Because again, it's clearly through the mother, but it's the father who determines the Kohanic or the Levitical line. So the rule or the ruling, the custom, which again, it wasn't really an issue for a long time, because it's not that Jewish women didn't marry Gentile men. It's just they weren't Jewish anymore, and they weren't part of the community anymore. It's not like their kids weren't Jewish anymore. It just didn't happen. I mean, it just didn't happen very often, I should say. It just did happen. It just didn't happen very often. So, based on our DNA tests, it shows that most of us, that didn't happen. So those people would generally have been raised not Jewish. They wouldn't have been Jewish anymore. But now it is. So the tradition is that if your father is not Jewish, you do have to be redeemed, even if your mother is a Kohen or Levi. It is an issue today. I mean, it is it does. It's an occurrence, not an uncommon occurrence. Interesting question. Can a woman Kohen, or can they do the redemption, right? Why not? Like if you're egalitarian, shouldn't a woman be able to do that? Which then again begs the question, should it be done at all? Should the Pinyon Haben be done at all in the egalitarian society? So there's a question about that. Because again, it only applies to sons. It only applies to boys. So an interesting question, one which is, I would say, not even asked so much anymore because a lot of people don't even know about the Pinyon Haben. But it was done for a long time.
If you had had boys, if Rachel had been a boy, would you have had a Pidyon Haben? Or no, Tracy's not Kohen.
Tracy, well, I'm going to answer that question in this way because I can't answer. There's parts of that question that are personal, but I will tell you that this wouldn't have happened because Rachel was cesarean.
Right.
So that's about as personal as I will get. But it wouldn't have happened. Yeah, we wouldn't have had, if Rachel was a boy, it wouldn't have happened because she was cesarean. The interesting thing is that Dina was not. Shira was. So she went back and forth, but they don't do it anymore. They would, I think, I don't even know why we did that, but probably too much detail now. But anyways, the point is that it is so common now for people to be delivered C-section that, like, I think we're going to get to a point where people will be delivered out of a incubator anyways, and so then we will all be in the brave new world, and we won't have Pinyon for anybody. Or maybe when we crack open the incubator, we'll do it. So, as Judith said, for all the Skylers and Chads of the future, and when they are born, it will be, I don't know, maybe we'll have a different ritual for them. But it's an interesting question. All right, there's one more little thing here about, I don't even know what to call this, but yes, the Pinyon Haben, the 5 shekels that you got to pay.
To avoid quarrels among the firstborn, as otherwise each one would try to lay the payment of redemption money upon his neighbor, Moses wrote upon 22,000 slips of paper the word Levi, and upon 273 the words 5 shekels, all of which were then thrown into an urn and mixed. Then every firstborn had to draw one of the slips. If he drew a slip with Levi, he was not obliged to remit any payment. But if he drew 5 shekels, he had to pay that sum to the priests.
Yeah, so this again gets to the 273 extra people who were not redeemed, if you will, or not part of the exchange. So there were some people, and so what they did is they essentially did it by a lottery, that only 273 people out of 22,007 and 273 had to pay a redemption price, because again, it was not an even exchange. It wasn't 22,000 on one side and 22,000 on the other. So these Levites who kind of take the place of those Israelites, there was 273 that they still had to get counted for, which meant God was not going to be shorted on his payment. And so God got his payment by 273 unlucky Levites who had to pay. Because you got to pay, God wanted payment. So let's go into this. It's kind of weird. I completely understand people being like, why is that there? It's basically saying God followed the rules that God established. And so God made these rules, the redemption. And so there had to be, you got to play by the rules. And so even God establishes the rules, he follows his own rules. So, all right. So we have
4 divisions of Levites. Apart from the census of all male Levites, Moses now took another census of the men from the ages of 30 to 50, for only at this age were the Levites permitted to perform service in the tabernacle throughout their march through the desert, a law that indeed ceased to hold good when Israel settled in the Holy Land. These officiating Levites, as well as the priests, were divided by Moses into 8 sections, a number that was not doubled until the prophet Samuel increased it to 16, to which David again added 8, so that there were later 24 divisions among the Levites and priests.
So again, this 24 divisions is really important because you essentially have 2 per month. You have 2 divisions per month, which means that every rotation of the later on, when there were so many priests that you couldn't have them all working at the same time, it was really important to have these rotations. And again, depending on what month you were there, if you were there for a rotation when you get to be there for Sukkot, for example, oh, that's a good rotation to be there for. You got a lot of people coming there. If you're there in a slow month, not so good. You're not getting as much food. You're not getting as much money. So it was really unfair if you had a bad rotation, and that definitely happened. There were Kohanim that had a bad rotation. This is actually part of the backstory, if you will, about the Hasmoneans, the Maccabees. They did not have a good rotation. These were not the powerful the powerful Kohanim. They did not have a good rotation. Eventually, of course, they get the best rotation because essentially they become kings. But the Hasmoneans were not a good rotation. They were not in a good rotation initially. So these 24 rotations are really important. And the Levites are also divided up with their Kohanim. They're matched up so that different groups of Levites would serve with different Kohanim. They'd be matched up. So definitely they were prime groups to be a part of.
The most distinguished among the Levites were the sons of Kohat, whose charge during the march through the desert was the Holy of Holies, and among the vessels, particularly the Holy Ark. This latter was a dangerous trust, for out of the staves attached to it would issue sparks that consumed Israel's enemies, but now and then this fire wrought havoc among the bearers of the ark. It therefore became a customary thing when the camp was about to be moved for Kohat's sons to hasten into the sanctuary and seek to pack up the different portions of it, each one planning cautiously to shift the carrying of the ark upon another. But this even more kindled God's anger against them, and he slew many of the Kohatites because they ministered to the ark with an unwilling heart. To avert the danger that threatened them, God ordered Aaron and his sons to enter first into the sanctuary and to appoint to the Kohatites every one his service and his burden, that they might not go in to see when the holy things are covered, lest they die. This was done because previous to this command, the sons of Kohat had been accustomed to feast their eyes on the sight of the ark, which brought them instantaneous death. But according to this order, Aaron and his sons first took apart the different portions of the sanctuary, covered the ark, and not till then called the sons of Kohat to bear the burden.
So the Kohathites are the Levites who get to carry the good stuff, right? So the Merarites and the Gershonites, as I said, they carry the poles and the drapes and the not good stuff. Now, the rabbis want to point out here, carrying the good stuff comes with a great deal of risk. Yeah, you get to carry the ark, but then again, the ark is really powerful and it kills people, which the Torah tells us, the Bible tells us later on, happens during the stories in Samuel of bringing the ark into Jerusalem, that some guy literally gets killed just trying to stop it from falling off a cart. Uzzah. I mean, this is like a real scary thing that even trying to show it respect, it's dangerous. It's powerful. And so as much as you think the Kohathites are very lucky, and remember, Kohat, this is Moses's clan. This is Moses and Korach and Aaron's cousins, if you will. So these are the Levite clan that, they're most powerful. They get to do this. The Midrash tells us, yeah, but it also didn't come without some really, really scary things, which interestingly, what does it do? It makes the Kohathites frightened and not want to do their job. And so, which only gets God more upset with them because they don't want to do their job. You can kind of understand God, why they don't want to do their job. They get killed by the ark. The ark explodes on them. It electrocutes them. It burns them. Who, you could understand who's not going to be afraid of that. So the Midrash does a couple things. Number one, it tells us that, yeah, being around these powerful things might have been really exciting, but they are also dangerous. So there is that. And so it's kind of a reminder that you play with fire, you can get burned. And it's fun to play with, things that can explode, but they can explode. And so there's a good lesson there about that, great power comes great responsibility. Right? And so this is the lesson that the Kohathites get, that Moses's, Aaron's inner tribe of Levites gets. And of course, the Kohanim to some extent come to their aid. The Kohanim come up and get in there first to make sure that none of the Levites will get burned up. So if they come in there and cover it up and kind of check it first, the Levites, the Kohathites will be okay. So again, the Kohathites are just one part of the Levites, but they're the ones who are the lucky ones who get to carry the ark. Again, it is dangerous and it can cause problems. So here's some of the other problems that come with carrying the ark.
During the march, the Levites might wear no shoes, but had to walk barefoot because they carried and ministered to holy objects. The Kohathites, moreover, had to walk backwards, for they might not turn their backs to the holy ark. They were, furthermore, owing to their offices as bearers of the ark, distinguished by being the first of the Levites to be numbered in the census, although in other respects the sons of Gershon led, for Gershon was the firstborn of Levi.
So again, within the group of the Levites, the Kohathites are given great responsibility, but again, is it always so good? I mean, the rabbis are recognizing that they do get this special, I mean, it seems like a whole lot better than carrying the poles. And again, but think about what they had to do. And so one of the things that they had to do is they had to walk barefoot. Another thing they had to do, they had to walk backwards. I don't know if all of them had to go backwards. It would seem to me
that in the front, you would think.
Yeah, the ones in the front did. The ones in the front had to walk backwards. The ones who were carrying it, they didn't have to. The ones who were, they would have to walk backwards. They couldn't turn their back to the ark. So as they're marching, the ones who were turned towards the front, towards the ark, had to walk backwards. I guess maybe they took turns. I don't know, but
I hope so.
The idea that you and I would have, that when they carry the ark, one person, one group was carrying the.
But she carried it sideways.
It's also not easy. Everybody's walking sideways if they're holding the poles.
I mean,
So
David could.
yes, you could not carry it with their back to the. That would have been a hard thing to do, to walk backwards for long periods of time. Not easy to do. So doesn't say that in the Torah, but the rabbis derive from the fact that it wouldn't seem very respectful to do that they would have, it also could be that at some point the ark was on a cart, in which case they only took it on and off the cart. And yes, maybe they didn't turn their back on it when they were taking it off the cart, but that isn't the same as walking for miles backwards. So I'll only say that we know that the ark goes on carts later on. Well, all right. So let's read what also happens with Kohathites.
When giving the commission to count the sons of Kohat, God explicitly mentioned that Moses should undertake the census with Aaron, but he did not do so when he ordered the numbering of the sons of Gershon. Moses now thought that God had done this intentionally because the former were directly under Aaron's supervision while the Gershonites were not. Nevertheless, out of respect to his brother, he bade his brother, as well as, out of courtesy, the princes of the tribes to be present at the numbering of the Levites, but he did not tell Aaron that he did so in the name of God. In this Moses erred, for God wished Aaron to be present at the numbering of the Levites. For this reason, when he ordered the census of the third division, Merari's sons, to be taken, he expressly mentioned Aaron's name. At the apportionment of the service among the individual Levites, however, Aaron paid attention only to the sons of Kohath, each of whom had his special task allotted to him, whereas Moses appointed their tasks to the sons of Gershon and Merari. The highest chief of the Levites, however, was Eleazar, who was to have the oversight of them that keep the charge of the sanctuary. But despite his high position, Eleazar was modest enough to participate in the service in person. During their marches from place to place, he himself would carry all needful things for the daily offering. In his right hand, he carried the oil for the candlestick. In his left hand, the incense. On his arm, the things that were made in the pans, and attached to his girdle, the phial with the oil for ointment. Ithamar, Eleazar's brother, who also had a duty in the sanctuary, for it was he to whom the guidance of the service of Gershon's and Merari's sons was assigned. For these must perform none but the service God had specially assigned to them, as no Gershonite might perform the duty of a Merarite and vice versa, and each individual, too, had his special duty, that no quarrel might arise among them.
Wow. So the Levites each had their responsibilities. Again, the Gershonites and Merarites don't seem to have as much inner responsibility as the Kohathites, but they do have an important role to play, and each of them had their role to play. What's interesting, of course, is that there's three groups of Levites. The Kohathites, the ones who minister to the ark and to the laver and to the altar and to all those things, they answer to Eleazar. They answer to Aaron's son Eleazar, who's going to be the next high priest. So you could imagine, again, he has a very big responsibility. And Ithamar, the other son, he was in charge of the Gershonites and Merarites. He was like their boss. So remember, Aaron had four sons, Nadav and Avihu both died. And now Eleazar and Ithamar are both doing their things, whereas Eleazar has only one clan of Levites to be in charge of. It's really important because he's handling those items. And essentially they're saying that Ithamar, taking care of the other two tribes, he's overseeing those other things. Look, the Levites at a certain point in time were a very important part of the offerings. And according to the Bible, the Levites were offering sacrifices at a certain point in Jewish history. It's only later on that the Kohanim are the only ones offering up sacrifices. So it seems as though as the Israelites multiplied, who got to offer up sacrifices and who had responsibilities for these holy things becomes a bigger issue, because there's more and more people who are able to take part in these things. And so the division of labor becomes somewhat problematic, because you got more people than you have things to do, tasks. So you got a little bit of a problem. You have to rotate later on. You have to have rotations. You have to maybe figure out ways to not even have people do, they're not even doing anything anymore. So this is really tough, because eventually the cult, the ritual of the temple, they just had too many people. There's just too many hands. So there's only so many things you can give to people. And again, division of labor was important, but what happens when you have 100 people that need to do the work of 2 people? So this is a problem, or 1,000 people doing the work of 2 people. So this
They
was
had the problem at Kibbutz Effect. Once they had automated their farm, 6 people could run it. And then they had, 300 people on the kibbutz.
yeah, and when kibbutzim used to bring in volunteers, they would literally go like, what do we do with these people? We do not want these people touching anything, because we have to train them and whatever. So it did get to be a problem, and kibbutzim themselves started figuring out ways to trying to kick people out, essentially, like saying, maybe you should find another place to live, because it just can't support it. It's the same thing with every royal family. There was only so many titles they could give out to people, and eventually they said, there's just too many people, and it's just it's like,
you know what, I'd rather have a real job.
so occasionally there's a guy like Harry who says, you know what, I'll opt out. I don't need this craziness anymore. But it is a problem, because as one branch of that, I mean, it's always one branch becoming bigger, but if you live long enough and you live to be like Queen Elizabeth, and you get to see your great grandkids grow up, there's a lot of people in line, right? There's a lot of people who are technically heirs. So you have to you have to keep whittling down the tree. I mean, the tree has to get smaller.
That's a big part of the drama in the Crown series. The people get elbowed out of as they get remoter and remoter from the succession, they're less and less important, and they don't know how to deal with it.
Yep. And that's man, I was reading an article recently. I don't know why do I care about this stuff, but
It's fascinating. Why do we care about this?
Charles, yeah, well, I guess, but this is our stuff. No, but Charles has been treating his brother like garbage. I'm talking about his youngest brother, who people don't even talk about. Edward. They don't even talk about Edward.
Right.
But supposedly, I was reading some article again. This is literally, but why is Charles is not allowing Edward to do stuff? I don't know. I mean, whatever. But they basically said, he was humiliating his brother. That Charles bears this grudge against Edward. And by the way, supposedly it goes back to the fact that Philip always treated Edward a lot better than Charles, because Charles was the heir apparent, and he didn't want him to become a baby. He didn't want to show him too much affection, but he showed his youngest brother a lot of attention. And so Edward was supposed to be elevated to the Duke of Edinburgh, and he did not. Charles hasn't done that yet. I don't know why. Again, why do I even care about this? But yes, it does happen even to this day, where people are trying to figure out roles for people and titles for people, and the bigger the family tree gets, the harder it gets to figure out what to do with them. Oh, but will tell you royal watchers, that another interesting Jewish story today. Not that this one's a little creepy, I guess, but William and Harry's cousin on the Spencer side, just got married this past weekend to a Jewish guy. And supposedly she either converted or they definitely had a Jewish wedding. So yeah, Lady Di's niece, Kitty Spencer, married a Jewish guy, South African tycoon, billionaire, that they own a lot of stores, retail stores. I only say that it's a little creepy because the guy's 62. He's 5 years older than Diana's brother. I guess Earl Spencer is 50. I guess it'll make him 57. So yeah, her new husband is 5 years older than her dad. But yes, she had supposedly an Orthodox wedding. So she's 30 and her new husband is Michael Lewis is 62. So he's 32 years older than her and a Jewish guy from South Africa. So, but she was also raised in South Africa, Kitty Spencer. So again, I'm sharing with you things about royal family that I never. Why do I even care? But anyways, yes, Charles Spencer's daughter Kitty is married to a Jewish guy now. So Lady Di would have been at a Jewish wedding this past weekend. Anyways, what are we gotten off topic here? But it just reminds us that these priests and Levites had roles to play, and as the Midrash says, don't get out of order. You perform the rite that you're supposed to do, and you perform the rite you're supposed to do, and don't step out of line. Everybody has their role to play. Everybody's doing stuff. We're going to finish with this Midrash, which I really like for a lot of reasons. Well, it's a great visual Midrash. I love visual Midrash. This one really is. This is a cool one. So let's take a look.
The four standards. When God appeared upon Sinai, he was surrounded by 22,000 angels, all in full array and divided into groups, each of which had its own standard. Looking upon these angel hosts, Israel wished like them to be divided into groups with standards, and God fulfilled their wish. After Moses had completed the census of the people, God said to him, "Fulfill their wish and provide them with standards as they desire. Every man of the children of Israel shall pitch by his own standard with the ensign of their father's house. Far off about the tabernacle of the congregation shall they pitch." This commission greatly agitated Moses, who thought, "Now will there be much strife among the tribes. If I bid the tribe of Judah pitch in the east, it will surely state its preference for the south, and every tribe will likewise choose any direction but the one assigned to it." But God said to Moses, "Do not concern yourself with the position of the standards of the tribes, for they have no need of your direction. Their father Jacob, before his death, ordered them to group themselves about the tabernacle, just as his sons were to be grouped about his bier at the funeral procession." When Moses now told the people to divide themselves into groups around the tabernacle, they did it in the manner Jacob had bidden them.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff going on in this, which again, one of the coolest things is that the tribes go back to Jacob's blessing to them about how they're going to be, where they're going to stand around the tabernacle, the way they camp, the way they sleep, the way they align themselves. Okay, that's a great connection to the fact that it goes all the way back to Jacob. And the parallel here is that they align themselves, arrange themselves around the ark the way they did around their father's coffin, which is interesting and powerful when you consider that the word for ark is the same word as the word for coffin. It's an aron, and it's the same word. And so just as they kind of camped in front of their father's coffin, that's the way they camped around the Mishkan. So that's a powerful image. But there's another really powerful image that I love from the very beginning, which is that at Mount Sinai, the angels are divided into groups, and they each have their own banner. They have their own standard. And the angelic armies with their standards are an inspiration to the Israelites and say, we want to be like the angelic armies. We want to have our own standards. We want to have our own banners too. And that to me is like a really cool visual, that each tribe had their own banner. And of course, gets a little Game of Thrones-ish, I know. But it's also in all the Kurosawa movies too, you know, the Japanese, you know, daimyo lords with their different cool banners. But I love that visual, that each tribe had their own banner. Well, I love the idea of the angels having each of their own banner. That's pretty cool.
You wouldn't think the angels needed them.
I know, but they did. They had angelic. This is like some weird kind of painting, you know, one of these this artwork.
Medieval painting, you could definitely see.
But I'm thinking of more of a heavy metal rock album cover from the 70s. It's more of that for me, but it's a really visual image that you can try to imagine what those banners look like, you know, the colors, the images on them, whether they had an animal on them, you know, some kind of cool pattern. But that the Israelites were like, oh wow, the angels have standards. We're gonna have them too. Each tribe is gonna have their own banner. And so I love that image. I mean, it's a very visual image, but it's very visual Midrash. But what I love about it too is that this is kind of like the Israelites becoming like warriors and becoming free people, because one of the things that they're doing here is they are kind of asserting their independence by having a flag. And this is like, you know, this is kind of like saying we're free people, you know, we're not Egyptian slaves anymore. We are soldiers, we're warriors, we're a nation, we're a group that has their own pride and their own flag. And to me, this is just like a really cool, you know, this is like, oh yeah, we are free people. And so that, and of course they have this identity too. I mean, you know, it's of course leads to people going to war against each other, which banner they're flying, but all the banners flying together is a real sense of unification and a real sense of everybody cooperating and everybody coming together with under their banners for one thing. And to me, of course, this, you know where I'm going with this. This is what the Olympics are all about. You know, the thing that, you know, really resonates for people, even when there's no crowds or anything, is when they march in with their flags, you know, the person who gets to carry the flag. And then of course, when a flag is raised and people get to hear the anthem of that country. And especially, you know, you get a small country like Israel that gets to have their flag raised, how much pride there is in, you know, seeing your flag, seeing your banner. So I will tell you that, you know, Israel did get to see their flag raised, which is pretty cool. Israel won a gold medal in gymnastics, which they had never done before. They've won a total of 3 medals right now. And just so you know, as far as total medals go, that places Israel pretty high up as far as medals. There are a lot of countries that have not won a medal yet at all, much bigger countries. So there is a sense of pride. There is a sense of, you know, national pride that people have in their flag and in competing and that kind of thing. But again, the fact that everybody's coming together everybody has a common purpose to be together in that place. Must have been like what the Israelites were thinking when they were around the Mishkan, each with their banners, but each knowing that they were, had a common cause and were marching together. All those tribes marching together under their banners, under their standards. So it's kind of a cool, kind of a cool midrash, kind of a nice image to take with. Again, they're working together. They're not fighting each other. All right. Well, let's look at some of these. Let's look at some of the midrash on this standards.
The Lord by wisdom has founded the earth, by understanding has he established the heavens. The division of the tribes of Israel according to 4 standards, as well as their subdivision at each standard, is not arbitrary and accidental. It corresponds to the same plan and direction as that of which God made use in heaven. The celestial throne is surrounded by 4 angels. To the right, Michael, in front, Gabriel, to the left, Uriel, and to the rear, Raphael. To these 4 angels corresponded the 4 tribes of Reuben, Judah, Dan, and Ephraim, the standard bearers. Michael earned his name, who is like to God, by exclaiming during the passage of Israel through the Red Sea, "Who is like unto you, O Lord, among the gods?" And he made a similar statement when Moses completed the Torah, saying, "There is none like unto the God of Yeshurun." In the same way, Reuben bore upon his standard the words, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord." Hence Reuben's position with his standard to the right of the sanctuary corresponded exactly to Michael's post at the right of the celestial throne. Gabriel, God is mighty, stands in front of the throne, as Judah, mightiest among his brethren, was the standard bearer in front of the camp. Dan, the tribe from which emanated dark sin, stood at the left side of the camp with his standard corresponding to the angel Uriel, God is my light, for God illuminated the darkness of sin by the revelation of the Torah, in the study of which this angel instructed Moses, and devotion to which is penance for sin. The tribe of Ephraim was the standard bearer to the rear of the camp, occupying the same position as Raphael, God heals, holds at the celestial throne. For this tribe, from which sprang Jeroboam, was in need of God's healing for the wound that this wicked king dealt Israel.
So each one of the directions corresponds to a different one of the angels who are in the different directions. So each subgroup of tribes, each section of 3 tribes is led by a different tribe. So there's a tribe in the Reuben, Judah, and Dan and Ephraim are the 4 heads of their cohort. So each group of 3 tribes has a leader, and so Reuben, Judah, Dan, and Ephraim are the leaders, and they correspond to the 4 angels that surround God. And again, there's this midrash that Michael is called Michael because he says, "Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai." He says, "Who is like God?" And that's how Michael, the angel, gets his name. That's a really good position to be at, to be like where Michael is. And that's Reuben's position. Gabriel is God's strength, and he is Judah. He corresponds to Judah, who's the strongest of the tribes. That's the tribe of King David. That's the tribe of warriors. As you go around, though, you come to the other tribes. That Dan leads his group and Ephraim leads his group. Both of those tribes, we know later on, they have leaders who do bad stuff. Dan is the tribe of Samson, which not all good or all bad. He's good and bad qualities. But Dan is also responsible later on for one of the idolatrous situations that happens in the book of Judges, and that's a problem. And Jeroboam, who's the king who rebels against Solomon, he's a problem. He's from the tribe of Ephraim, and he becomes the founder of the northern Israelite kingdom that breaks away from Judah. So these tribes have problems, and their angels that are kind of their heavenly correspondent, they will help them because they need help. Raphael is helping Ephraim because of Jeroboam and what he's going to do. And Uriel, who's God's light, the Uriel means God's light, the light of God. He is going to help the Danites who have darkness from them. So those are angels who essentially not complement or not are produced or essentially represented by them, but actually are needed to complement them or to help them for their missing pieces and for the problems that they're going to have. So angels can, on one hand, be representative of who we are, but in some cases they come to our aid and help us for the things that we're missing already. So you see two examples of angels who are representative to their leadership, Reuben and Judah's leadership, and you have two that are representative of Dan and Ephraim's inadequacies, if you will. So it's really interesting that these angels are also connected to the tribes, which again makes sense when we talked about the fact that the Israelites see their tribal configurations as representatives and as like a kind of earthly representation of the angelic hosts that are arrayed in front of God or around God. And so this is kind of a midrash explaining why this connection between the angels and the tribes are what they are. And it's a powerful connection. We still invoke the names of those angels during the traditional prayer of the Shema that we say, the nighttime prayer or the bedtime the Shema that's said on lying down at bed, where we actually invoke those angels, right? That we have Michael, we have Gabriel, we have Raphael and Uriel, these four archangels protecting us while we sleep, with the Shekhinah, with God's presence over us. So we actually have four directions and then a fifth direction. Over us is God. So that when we sleep, we essentially become like the Mishkan. We are surrounded by God and God's presence while we sleep to protect us. So the angels are on our sides of our bed to, like the ark, like God, to be surrounded by protection. So it's a really nice image. It was one that was supposed to comfort people when they were sleeping. I don't know if it could also be a little scary for kids to think that there's angels all around them when they sleep, but it's good angels. It's angels protecting us, and that the Shekhinah is over us. God's presence is over us while we sleep. So that is the traditional Shema of the nighttime, to say that they're surrounded by us. Now there definitely is a right lefty. There is a preference for the right versus the left, which is very biblical and not politically correct. But there is that sense that on your right is your strength, and on your left is your sin, is your sinister side, as we say, which is, of course, what sinister means, folks. For those of you who are lefties, I apologize, but you're sinister. But that is the
Systemic dexterism, I guess you'd call it.
systemic dexterism. That's good. Yeah, it is Dexter. I guess it would be dexterism.
I don't know. There's probably an official word for it. I just made that one up.
It's actually, yeah, it's probably not just dexterity. It's probably.
Well, no, I was thinking of dexter meaning right.
No, I know, but yeah.
It is, of course, itself.
Yeah. Oh, but is it systemic symmetrism. Is it symmetrism or
I don't know. There's probably some word for it. I'll have to look
is
it
it,
up.
is it symmetrism? But yes, there was the sense that the left was not your good side
Right.
and your weak side, your side that that was the side that was leading you to the darkness.
Yes.
But you do have protection on that side. So just know that your left side is the angel Uriel, which is God's light. So you have protection even there. But no, I mean, there was definitely some understanding. And again, these 4 angels are the ones that are the highest angels. So folks, it was good seeing you all. We will see you next week, and hopefully everyone will stay healthy and be protected by the angels all around us, especially the angel Raphael, God's healing angel. May you be healed and protected and stay strong, stay healthy, everybody. Don't get in any trouble. Don't get sick, please. So we will see you either tomorrow night or in the coming days. Stay good, everybody. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.